So this is a question that was about kind of how do I teach pull-ups to a class that has a whole bunch of beginners and a whole bunch of more advanced athletes, and that totally depends on what the class is. If the class is about pull-ups, meaning we're doing a workout where the primary movement is the pull-up, then you can be a little bit more robust with your teaching, and that depends on the session that you have, how many times before you've taught that. But pull-ups pop up quite often, so every day you're not going to be teaching the exact same progression to the pull-up. Very often it's like, hey, here's our different scales for the day, choose the appropriate one, go for that. That being said, there's a bunch of scales you can use. You can use a jumping pull-up, depending if it's lower volume in the total amount of pull-ups that you're doing for the workout. It's a great scale for it. If it's a lower volume there, do a jump, slow, lower. And we're talking low volume like 30, no more than that if you're doing a jump, slow, negative. You can do a banded pull-up. I think banded pull-ups are totally legit. A lot of people criticize them, but it's just one tool in a toolbox to help people achieve a similar type of stimulus to a normal pull-up. Would you always use banding pull-ups? No, you got to switch up the stimuli. Also, make sure you're dropping the bands back. If you're using banded pull-ups, make sure sometimes you're challenging them as the coach. You don't just say, hey, go get your band, and they go straight to their comfort band. You, as a coach, push them to go lighter and lighter bands. 3, I think ring rows are a fantastic scale. I think it changes the plane of the pulling, but it also rounds out somebody's ability pretty heavily in their strength in the pull. And I think they're kind of self-limiting in the sense that they don't continue to scale themselves throughout the workout. You stick with one of those scales and they kind of stay there throughout the entire workout. You don't progressively scale as they get more and more tired. So I think finding different scales is some of the days you're just going to go in and just say, hey, find your scale for the pull-up today, boom, and then you send them all out. The other days where it's more of a pull-up centric style day, where the pull-up is the thing that you want to teach, that's more where we can talk about how you're going to teach that. And I think everyone gets to practice their pull-up, whether if you're an advanced athlete, you're more working through a progression to get everything warm to where you can get to your pull-ups. Plus, there's no harm in working a progression. A lot of advanced athletes these days only do butterfly, and they never practice a normal kip. So working through a basic progression is not really an issue in any way. And if it is an issue, then you have a culture issue at your gym where people aren't willing to practice, warm up, and learn stuff, and that's a bigger question. But the general progression that I use for it is I have people do a couple hangs, so they jump up and they hang on the bar, kind of 20-30 seconds overhand, 20-30 seconds underhand, and then mixed grip, so they get the shoulders a bit. Then we'll do a couple swings back and forth, kind of focusing on what the shoulder's doing. Then what we'll do is a kip swing where we close the angle of the hip and bring the knees up. So a couple swings, close the angle, bring the knees up, and it basically gets some upward momentum. Within that, I teach a drive down with a straight arm so people get a little bit of elevation. And one drill for that is you have people stand side by side, put their hands on their shoulders, push the other person down into the ground with a straight arm, and that's the drive onto the bar, not a pull up. And then if people are there and they're getting that good kip swing and they can kind of go, I allow somebody to try to kind of pull themselves up using that kip swing. So ideally here you would kind of drop into place a strict pull-up where people are jumping, trying one strict, and if they can't do a strict, then they're going to something more of like a box swing or a banded pull-up, a banded strict or a banded kipping, or a ring row. But you can also have people practice this kip swing, practice the kipping dynamic motion for it, as long as it looks sensible and their shoulder looks stable. Be smart about that, err on the side of caution, but at the same time, getting your first pull-up is a very, very emotionally driving and satisfying thing for so many athletes. So don't be so far on the spectrum where you're like, yeah, unless you can do 13 strict pull-ups, you should never be attempting a kip. Like, you're a wanker if you think that. And I'm just being honest, you're not going to have many people who want to stay at your gym because you're overboard in a certain spectrum. Also, on the other side of things, don't have someone who has absolutely zero ability to hold themselves on the bar attempt a violent kip. That's just not structurally sound for ye old shoulder. So do that kip swing there, kip swing to the pull. So they do the kip swing, get themselves up above the bar. If they can do that, then you practice the push away, where they kind of push themselves back and around. And then from there, you can kind of work your way into teaching more and more refined versions of that, like a frog kip or a butterfly pull-up. The idea is that people are doing little sets and practicing some component of that. And as you work your way through, some people might have to go back to a different place in the progression. So if you get to the place where you're doing the actual pull-up and they can't do it, they still practice just like 5 or 6 kip swings. Or they practice 5 or 6 jump slow negatives. And that's just an easy communication thing, is like, hey, if you're able to do this, head here. If you're not able to do this, head here. And ready, everybody try it for the next like 2 minutes. And then you go around and you coach and you make that work. So managing the class will be totally dependent on the people who are in front of you and dependent on the day, whether or not you're actually teaching the pull-up, or it's a day where you're saying, hey, get to your normal scale, and then you as a coach modulate that scale. Long-winded way of that's how I teach the pull-up on different days.